Though machine quilting has been around for a long time, the past 30 years has seen more and more long arms making its way into the home. New styles and new techniques have been developed. And last year, Amazon suggested that I might want to check out one particular style called graffiti quilting. Today's guest is Karlee Porter, a long armer extraordinaire. She is the author of Grafitti Quilting, which is about to come out in its 3rd edition. She is also the co-founder of Honest Fabric, a printing collective specializing in custom printed, large format quilt tops, which means no piecing required. And she's going to tell us all about both. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea, and here's my interview with Karlee Porter. Welcome, Karlee, to the show. Tell us, where in the world are you coming to us from?
I am born and raised in northern Utah.
Born and raised. So are you in the same town where you were born, or you moved on?
Technically, I'm about 10 minutes west of where I was born and raised. So I grew up in Ogden, Utah, and now I live in West Haven, which is just right between the mountains and the Great Salt Lake.
So you have family close by then?
Yeah, most of us. I have a couple siblings that live out of state, but for the most part, we're all just stuck here in Utah.
So did you have a history of crafters or quilters in your family?
So I grew up in a family that was very just creative in different ways, musically inclined or very interested in, film or crafts. So for me, the biggest one was definitely sewing when I was a kid. However, I didn't really get into quilting until after I was an adult and married and moved out of the house. I have kind of a weird entry into the quilting world, but I like to introduce myself as an artist because I've always been very artistically inclined with visual art, painting, drawing, sketching, crayons, ceramics, cross stitching, all of the visual art that a kid could do. That's where you would find me, is in the art room of my high school, skipping all of my other classes that I needed to graduate in order to just go do art in the art room. So I don't know how I graduated, but here I am.
Did you go on to college?
I did. It took me about 6 years to get my degree. It's just an Associates of Arts degree. So I got married 7 days after I graduated high school. And at that point in time, I was like, I am not a school person. I don't really like this. I already know I want to be an artist. So I just need to find a full-time job, help put my husband through school. He was going to school to be a software engineer at the time. And so school was kind of the furthest thing from my mind. As I was building my artistic skills, everyone was like, oh, but you should get a degree. You should get a degree. And so I was like, okay, fine. And I locked in my math credit for my degree. And then I was like, okay, well, if I did all the work for math, then I need to just lock in my actual degree so that the math wasn't done in vain. So I did literally just enough to get my degree so that I would never have to do college level math again. But yeah, so I got a degree in 2016, an Associates of Arts. I don't really use it a ton. I feel like I learned more by just being a creative person than I did by going to school to learn graphic design.
So when did you make your first quilt and why?
Before I was introduced to machine quilting, I was raised in a family where like my mom and my aunts and my grandma would get together and they would have like the big 2x4 frame in the living room that they would tie quilts with yarn. And so as a kid, when I heard about quilting, it was like, oh yeah, I go under the big frame. My mom pushes the needle down and I pull the yarn through and I stick it back up and she pulls it back up. And to me, that was like quilting. That was my quilting experience. And then when I was engaged to be married, my mom and my aunts and my grandma, pieced a quilt top. And then at my bridal shower, we had the big frame out and we hand quilted it with embroidery thread. So quilting was kind of on my radar. So after I got married, I was just looking for a full-time job so that I could, start like paying my dues and being a wife and putting my husband through school and all of that stuff, just kind of building a life with my husband. So I had just put out my resume to basically any job within 25 miles of me that I was even semi-qualified for. And my resume at the time was not impressive. Like I worked at a Mexican restaurant, I worked at an ice cream shop, I had worked for some local politicians doing like door to door canvassing, like just nothing unique, nothing special. Anyway, so I sent out my resume to a bunch of different places, and I got a call from a manufacturing company that's about a half an hour south of me. And they were like, hey, we have this entry level position where you'll build like subcomponents for heavy machinery. And I was like, okay, well, I could try, I'm open. I just need a full-time job that has health benefits. And so I go to this interview only to realize halfway through the interview that the heavy machinery that I would be building and testing subcomponents for are long arm quilting machines, which I had never seen before. So I got this job in the production department of Handy Quilter, where the first thing that I learned how to do was set up a machine and stitch out all of these specific designs that were testing the quilting machine. So for the first like 6 months of working there, I was getting paid to learn how to use a quilting machine, which is like completely opposite. Most people pay to learn how to quilt. And then along with that, I did lots of other positions like learning how to solder circuit boards and program circuit boards and some of the different like mechanical subcomponents of the machine, like the head frame and the drivetrain assembly and all of these parts that are inside of a quilting machine. So it was just kind of crazy because my first experience with running a quilting machine was not artistic at all. It was very scientific in the sense that it's like, here's your 4 designs. You need to stitch out these designs, check the tension, make sure that the machine functions, and then send it to shipping and do it all over again for 40 hours a week. Now, the thing that was really cool about that job is that they would allow employees to take home a loaner machine to keep at their house to do creative stuff. So I got on the list for the loaner because they would just like wait for a return machine or a refurbished machine, or if they were upgrading machines within the studio. When I finally got to take one home, it was just a little HQ sit down machine, like the earliest sit down model that they had. But it was cool because I would spend 8 hours a day at work stitching out all of the scientific stuff. And then at home, when my husband was knee deep in homework for getting his degree, I would stitch out all of the things in my sketchbooks that I had wanted to like explore creatively. So that's how I learned how to use an actual quilting machine. But all of the artistic style, it was really cool because I had already had all of that. Like I had sketchbooks filled with drawings and a very kind of unique style of drawing. Now I was just doing it with fabric and thread instead of in sketchbooks. I didn't learn how to do like legitimate patchwork until much, much, much later in my quilting career. And so for me, the quilting is kind of where I shine and where I like to show off because the part that I'm the best at.
So taking those drawings of yours and translating them into quilting, was that something you were doing very quietly, or were you sharing that with some of your fellow employees?
When I was working during the day, I wasn't really able to do all of these creative, cool designs that I was doing, which later became graffiti quilting. I was constrained to doing the same like 4 patterns over and over again. And so I wasn't showing off as much. But then when I started doing those things at home, I would of course bring them to work and show my coworkers and say like, look what I did. Like I was very proud of it. It was kind of funny because it started to turn into like coworkers fighting over these just like little quilts that I had made to hang in their cubicles. And so I even did a series where I would quilt out their name and do a cool design. So people had like quilted name tags in their cubicles. And then later on, when I was working for the company, when I was doing like the alpha development testing, where I got to test all of the pre-release products, at that point, I was able to do a little bit more creative quilting just in the process of testing these different products. And it's funny because people in passing that I worked with would be like, I want that. And I'd be like, you're going to have to fight with so-and-so because they already dibs it. It was clear that I had artistic skills, even though I wasn't doing anything artistically for Handy Quilter. But it was kind of fun to be able to really explore ways that I could show off because I had all of these drawings that were part of my style already. And so to be able to explore that and just have my hands on a quilting machine for hours and hours and hours was really, really super fun.
So you would have been somewhere alongside some very experienced quilters through Handy Quilter. Did they recognize right from the very beginning that you were doing something different?
I don't know. I mean, I think that The company as a whole, I think so, but I think it just varied from person to person, and it's like we all just worked at this company together where the main goal was producing good quilting machines for quilters, and so it wasn't really as much like the time or place for me to show off. I did a lot of different positions at Handy Quilter, but I actually never ended up doing any like real creative work with them. I would be like, hey, look what I made last night, and bringing it to work and showing it. But it was cool to be able to explore that and be kind of an open book in that way. And the other thing that was really cool is when I started pursuing writing my graffiti quilting book, the folks at Handy Quilter were very supportive of that and very encouraging, which was really cool because I definitely was not fitting inside of the typical demographic of a quote quilter, but I was definitely doing something very unique. And so to be able to explore that and have them be very supportive of the idea of me becoming a more professional person in the industry, it was really cool.
When did you go out into the quilting world and look into guilds or to other people and what you were doing?
It was very like little by little. I think there was kind of a point where people were like, oh, she just is some little kid who's an overnight success. And I was like, well, actually, it wasn't overnight. It was every night for a solid like 3 or 4 years of being like a nobody before anybody really cared who I was. At the beginning of 2014 was kind of when graffiti quilting really started to be this like discernible thing, or like a thing that was no longer just me kind of like doodling. It was like, oh my gosh, there's some rhyme or reason to what's happening here. I really should try to like expel what's going on inside of me onto paper. And so I started writing the graffiti quilting book in the summer of 2014. And then in the fall of 2014 is when it was published. And it was kind of cool because I had also entered a quilt into Houston International Quilt Festival that showcased graffiti quilting, and it got accepted and juried into the show. So it was kind of cool when I launched the book in the fall. I was also able to show a quilt hanging in the largest quilt show in the world, which was really super cool. Even before I started shipping the book, I was selling pre-orders like crazy, which was huge because I was self-publishing. And so to have people that were like, yes, shut up and take my money, and I'm ready for the book when it's ready, that was really cool. So when I did my first print of the very first graffiti quilting book, it was all paid for in full. So I didn't have to go into debt for that, which is a really big deal for publishing a book. So then in the spring of 2015, graffiti quilting really kind of took off like wildfire, and especially in even an international setting. And so I started getting invites from guilds and quilt shops that were international saying, hey, we love what you're doing. We want you to come and teach graffiti quilting. And so in the summer of 2015, I did an international tour where I did 2 stops in Canada. Then I also went to England, Ireland, and Scotland. And then I did a tour across Australia's southern coast teaching graffiti quilting, which just like blew my mind. I had never been out of the country. I'd only been on a plane like twice in my life before this point. And now there were people all over the world that were like paying for me to come and hang out with them. It was the most amazing thing ever. So it was really cool because all of these opportunities started coming in based on the book that I had spent, all of this time producing. And it was kind of funny because I was still working for Handy Quilter at the time, basically doing 2 full-time jobs. And if I was going to choose between my job and my artistic career that I had been working so hard to build, it was, kind of a no-brainer. So it was funny, but by the time I gave my notice and said, like, I'm ready to kind of do something more significant with my career, they were very supportive and very happy to see me growing, even if it was not being employed by them anymore. So in 2015, I did a whole international tour and have just kind of kept building on those building blocks for the last decade now.
But just go back just a little bit. So you're at home at night practicing your doodles. How long did it take before you felt you had an actual graffiti technique going? Was it from the beginning or did it grow over time?
It grew. It definitely grew over time. Like it's almost like I didn't know what I didn't know. It was still kind of developing and growing inside of me. It's almost like the difference between like if you're mining for gold and you hit a piece of gold and you pull it out and you're like, wow, this is gold. It was not that for me. It was more like planting seeds and then watering and saying like, oh, okay, if I give it this much sunlight, or if I give it this much water, or if I fertilize the idea with this sort of thing, then something I'll get a different result, right? So it was a lot of like trial and error. It definitely was not overnight, and it was also like unfolding before me as well, which was really cool. So this quilt behind me here, this quilt is super significant to me because it's the very first graffiti quilting quilt where I like finished this thing and I knew that I was onto something more than just like, oh, I was just playing. Like it wasn't random. There was definitely a discernible rhyme and reason that gave me some sort of seed to keep planting and building off from. So I would say from 1993 to 2012 was me planting seeds of my creativity, right? Like finding all of these different avenues, these like just understanding drawing techniques and all of these different like design aesthetics. I was very much into like graffiti style when I was in high school, practicing like my own graffiti version in my sketchbooks and things like that. And then it wasn't until starting to apply them to quilting where I was like, okay, I have different constraints, right? Like with drawing, you can sketch, but with a fabric and thread, it's a continuous line. So like, how do those things translate to fabric? And it's kind of funny now for those of you watching who have my very first graffiti quilting book that I wrote in 2014. It's like comparing that with like this gigantic mammoth of a beast. It's definitely grown to be more of like an orchard and not just like a single seed that was planted. I don't know if I could put a number to the amount of hours, but I think the 10,000 hour rule that they say to become a master at something, I would happily apply that to my journey. I feel like 10,000 hours is definitely a reasonable claim for how much time I've put into my skill as a free motion quilter.
So you were doing something different and you were probably breaking a number of quilting rules. So you probably experienced some pushback from certain people and many people, and that must have hurt a lot. So how did you find the strength to keep going when you were faced with those type of comments?
I would say the strength came from like part of it is humor. I think part of it is stubbornness. Part of it is pride. Like I said, I was raised in a big family. I have 5 older sisters. So a thick skin was like that was a commodity that I had built. So I think having a thick skin was helpful. And I think also just as an artist in general, learning how to defend your artistic choices is also a very valuable skill. I mean, I guess that's probably one good thing I got out of going to college was all of the most boring critiques that we had to sit through where everyone would hang their piece and it would be like just some dumb project that I was like, okay, this is such a waste of time. And then we'd all hang them up and we'd critique each other, right? And just through that process of learning how to defend myself as an artist, I think that helped kind of thicken my skin as well. I think another part of it is like stubbornness and pride, where it's like, if someone's going to tell me I can't do something, I'm just going to work harder to prove them wrong, which I think now I've learned to soften that vindication a little bit. And now it's like, okay, I don't need to prove to anybody. I can just prove to me. And that's enough proof. But in my early stages, it definitely was like, I'm going to show them, I'm going to show those quilt police, So yeah, I mean, I think it was hard in the sense that it was kind of an uphill battle for me based on my age. Just hearing kind of comments that were like, oh, honey, I've been quilting longer than you've been alive. Like, that's really cute, but you can sit down now, like things like that. When I would go to like a guild meeting and show and tell my thing only for people to be like, oh, that's cute, except for your binding sucks and your corner's not square. And what made you think it was okay to combine those two quilting motifs together? It was hard, but it also was fun. Like I feel like I have been able to like rise to the occasion of adversarial comments that fueled my ambition, right? But it also is really, really cool that kind of those same comments when it came to like my techniques or the way that I was executing my quilting, the more that I broke the rules, the better looking my quilts became. There's different areas of graffiti that kind of apply to graffiti quilting. For instance, rule breaking, right? So like there's lots of traditional quilting rules that in graffiti quilting, I teach my students like to break them deliberately, to understand that they exist and why they exist to get a certain outcome, and then to pragmatically break those rules and give people permission to do that, because I think sometimes people are just dying to break the rules and they're just waiting for someone to tell them to do it. So there's kind of that aspect to it too, that's like, I'm grateful for all of the rules that were pointed out to me, because then I could be a lot more mindful about how and why I was breaking them, and then also be able to defend my decisions to anyone who would listen, you know? So when people say like, oh, you're wasting so much thread with all that overstitching, I'd be like, here's why I did it. And also I'm going to do it more now just because I know that it makes your eye twitch. So have fun at the next guild meeting when I show you another quilt and everyone thinks it's amazing and you can just let your eye twitch and be mad about it because I'm wasting thread. Like, I don't know. So I kind of leaned into that like rebelliousness too, which I also think helped fuel my creativity. So there's kind of the balance between like the artistic side as well as the technical side of being a proficient free motion quilter. They both have their place, but it was hard, but it was absolutely worth every time that I tried again with every new quilt.
I met you at QuiltCon and you were surrounded by some lovely, lovely friends. How did you find your tribe?
So that tribe in particular, I feel so lucky. They are like new friends that I feel like I've known forever. Like it was so cool. So, I mean, the logistical side of that, I became friends with that group because I had planned my trip to QuiltCon at like the last minute. I didn't know I was going to be able to go to QuiltCon until a week before QuiltCon started. And so I booked my ticket and then I was like, now I need to find somewhere to stay. And so I just reached out on Instagram and said like, hey, if anyone knows of a non-psychopath who needs a roommate, like let me know because I need a place to stay. Tara Evans of Karlee Porter, she wrote me and was like, we have a spot if you don't mind sharing a bed with me. And I was like, okay, let's do this. So that was kind of jumping in the deep end. But, you know, I have found in general, when it comes to like finding my tribe, I have found continuously that the more authentic I can show up and allow myself to be vulnerable and just real with people, even when it is unflattering, I continue to be drawn towards my tribe of people who are loving and accepting and appreciate me for who I am instead of, you know, the quilt police that are like, oh, that's a really great YouTube video, but why didn't you do your nails? You know, or like just that sort of thing that I'm like, okay, clearly I'm not for you. So I think that the best way I guess anyone could find their tribe is figure out who you want to be and let people know you. And the people who like you will stay and the people who don't have to stay. But I've learned that I'm kind of an acquired taste. If I was a seasoning, I would be tahine seasoning because I know that not everybody likes it. I love it, but I feel like the people who do like it, like really love it. So anyways, I think learning that I don't have to be pleasing to everybody is a huge weight off of my chest and leaves a lot more space for people who want to be part of my tribe.
Well, Amazon clearly thought that you and I would get along because they kept suggesting graffiti quilting to me. And I picked it up one day. And I must say that I've really enjoyed using these techniques to make me a little less fearful when I'm free motion quilting. But I understand that you have edition number 3 coming out.
Yes, I do. Yeah. So check out this mammoth of a book. So let me show you.
3 times bigger, at least.
It is. It is 3 times bigger. So how many pages is volume 2?
Volume
I want to say it's like 90, 87, 85. Okay, 86. So the new book is 344 pages. Yes, this is like the last 10 years of, well, really more than 10 years, but this is my entire free motion quilting journey wrapped up in a nice, neat little, I don't know, 3-4 pound bow for y'all. I have poured myself into this book. I think it shows. So Yeah, so this is third edition of Graffiti Quilting. This is also a huge celebration of the 10-year anniversary of the launch of the graffiti quilting technique. Yeah, I really poured myself into it. And the cool thing about this book is with volume 1 and volume 2, they're books, right? All of the information that you get is text on a page or images on a page. But this is really more like an experience, because not only is it a beautifully printed book with lots of gorgeous photos, not to say that the old books didn't have those, because they do, but it also links to QR codes with hours and hours and hours of additional content that is just too comprehensive to type it out onto a page. So yeah, I'm very proud of this new book, and I'm really excited to share it with everybody, because I've just poured every ounce of myself into the development of this latest edition. And not to be like morbid, my husband hates that I've said this, but I feel like with this book, if I were to die at the end of this year, this thing would live. Like I feel like my life's work as a free motion quilting author and teacher and encourager would continue to live on, because I feel like I took absolutely everything that I could think of that was inside of me in terms of my love for quilting and put it into this like manifestation of a book. So yeah, I'm really super excited about it.
Now you've self-published this as well as edition number 1 and 2. What made you go that route?
There was a couple big reasons. So when I first started doing graffiti quilting, right, and I was showing people my own quilts, obviously the number one question they would say is, how do you do that? How did you do that? Oh my gosh, how'd you do that? And instead of me being like, okay, well, sit down and I'll teach you, I thought, okay, the next logical step is to write a book, right? To get this onto paper so that people can have something in their hand that they can learn to do what I've done. And so when I started pursuing writing a book, I mean, the first thing I thought was, okay, there's actually publishers in the quilting world who specialize in publishing quilting books, right? So I'm supposed to like write up a proposal and then submit it to publishers. Like I knew very little about the process. The more that I started looking into what it would actually take to publish a book in the quilting industry, the sadder I got. More just thinking like, okay, I have done so much work to conceptualize and verbalize all of these things, right? All of this education that I feel like I have to bring to the industry. As I reached out to various publishers, kind of the common status quo was like, oh, this is really great. We'll go ahead and like send you a contract. You'll be lucky if you make $1 a book. You'll be lucky if we print 5,000 of them. And really, you'll be most lucky if people see your book and then they hire you to teach events. So it was very much illustrated to me very quickly that writing a book was not seen as like an actual financial endeavor in building a business. It was more like a notch in your belt that would accompany other things, right? And I didn't want that. Like I had poured so much time into this. And then that was also kind of coupled with, oh, by the way, maybe we'll let you choose what cover quilt we put on the cover. And maybe we'll like let you, like name the book, like there were all these things that it was like, not only was I going to have to give up the financial incentive for having my name on a book as an author, but I was also being asked to give up so much more creative control than I was comfortable with. So, as I was looking through these options, I was like there's some red flags here that I really need to consider, because like graffiti quilting is mine. Like this is my baby. Like who in their right mind would be like, let me name your baby for you? Like, no, I get to name my own baby because I freaking birthed this baby, And so that kind of caused me to step back a little bit and say like, oh man, like I don't even know, like, what do I do next? Right. And I was very, very fortunate at the time. Like the timing was incredible. But after we decided that we weren't going to move out of state for my husband's job, we decided to buy our first home. And when we bought our first home, I met one of my neighbors who happened to be a specialist with self-publishing. And she was like, no. Like, let me help you keep your creative control and keep your money so that you can actually sustainably be a professional with a book being part of your overall financial health of your business. I will sing her praises forever and ever, because if it weren't for me crossing paths with her and her so freely and generously helping me understand how I could bring this project to fruition and also do it in a sustainable way so that I could continue down this creative path while still being able to support my family, it wouldn't have happened. So that's why I decided to self-publish, because it almost felt like a no-brainer. And I was very lucky as well that even though at this point in time I didn't have any college level experience with like graphic design, but I was completely self-taught in Illustrator and Photoshop and InDesign, which are like the three major graphic design softwares that any good designer could know about to be able to produce something. Yeah, so she was like, if you can design a PDF that looks really nice, all you need to do is find a company to print it for you. So she showed me which companies that I could choose from. And so I self-published my first graffiti quilting book in 2014. And it was so incredible. And it was cool too, because there was a validation that not only was the book self-published, but it was self-published well, because my skills were already backing up what just happened to be in book form. But I was able to pre-sell enough copies of the book to purchase my quilting machine with cash. So I didn't ever have to go into debt for my business, because my book was the thing that was able to launch me into my free motion quilting career, making enough money that I could even afford to quit my job at Handy Quilter, because I was paying myself more than I was making there. And all of that came because I had self-published. So I've never not self-published, because it's just always made sense for me to keep control, make more money per copy that I sell, and be able in turn to have the bandwidth to keep on developing the areas of my creative education that I wanted to share with people, because I had the financial bandwidth to do that.
So you are a mother of three, you are an author and a teacher, and now you and your husband have started another endeavor, Honest Fabrics.
Yeah. Yeah. So in 2018, we launched Honest Fabric, which is a fabric printing company that specializes completely in custom printed large format quilt tops. So panels, we don't print any yardage, and our smallest print is 50 by 60 inches. So we cater specifically to the quilters of the world, the people who want to be at their quilting machine as much as possible. So we produce and print beautiful pieces of artwork that are printed large format on a single piece of fabric that you can take straight to your quilting machine and spend more time quilting without having to actually piece a quilt top. We launched Honest Fabric in 2018, really kind of as a love letter to the quilting industry, saying like, there are some needs that we could possibly meet with Honest Fabric, but really it's a place that we are trying to elevate the community as a whole by offering something that is fair trade, American made, eco-friendly at an affordable price. I mean, it's cheaper than what it would cost to actually piece a quilt top of the same design. That's like kind of the elevator pitch of Honest Fabric. I have some quilts hanging in my studio. So this quilt right here is a custom printed quilt top that all of the design work was created digitally and then printed onto a piece of fabric that's 88 by 104 inches, and then loaded onto my quilting machine, where I quilted it and blinged it up and added all of the pizzazz with the quilting. Yeah.
Did you design that yourself?
I did. Yeah.
Wow.
And that actually won third place in Houston in 2000. I want to say 2000. Oh, it was 2018. That's right. Because it was cool. It was kind of like another happenstance that the year that we launched Honest Fabric was also the year that I had a quilt hanging in the show. And I just stood by this quilt for a lot of the show saying like, it's a whole cloth, it's a whole cloth. And just like blowing people's minds as they walked by, like, there's no piecing in it. There's no applique. It's a whole cloth. And they'd be like, what? And then I brought a piece of like the same design, just the fabric, so I could show them the difference. So it's cool because in the technological sense, we are able to offer quilt tops that you couldn't really produce with other methods. Like, so, can you imagine appliquing something like that, or piecing, or even painting it? Like, that makes me tired just thinking about it. But being able to design it digitally and then just have it print out, and now I could print it 100 times over and quilt it over and over again. So it was kind of cool because it was bringing a different aesthetic to quilting than what we normally see. But then it also was just a little tiny corner of the internet where we could offer a place for designers to showcase their artwork, to be compensated fairly for that, to try to bring more jobs closer to home. So all of the printing of our quilt tops is done in the United States, and being kind of eco-friendly too, in the sense that like we don't keep stock of any quilt tops. They're all printed on demand. So we don't produce any physical product until it has a home to go to where it's going to be used. So let me show you. I have a couple of just the quilt tops. This is one that I designed where I designed my own like line of fabric in Illustrator and then designed this quilt top. So it looks pieced, but it's just one single piece of fabric. So that's kind of fun. And some people will call these cheater panels. That's totally okay if you want to call me a cheater. I'll just tell you what my high school chemistry teacher said. He says, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. So, but they're really beautiful. They're really nice to quilt with. And the nice thing too is that they have 0 seams. It's all one single piece of fabric. And so you can just load it onto your frame. It loads really nice and smoothly because there's not seams there. They make really great practice panels. So if you're new to free motion quilting and you're a little bit scared to free motion quilt that gorgeous quilt top that you've spent, 150 to 200 hours piecing,
right?
Just grab a panel and throw that on first and give yourself some free motion quilting practice so that your free motion quilting skills can match your quilt top making skills.
So a couple of technical questions. What is the best needle to use on digital prints?
It's going to depend on your stitch length. It's going to depend on the type of thread you're using. It can sometimes depend on the batting you're using, or it can also depend on the backing you're using. There's lots of different variables. I typically will not base my decision on my needle on my fabric. I will base my needle decision on my thread. So I've always matched my needle choice to like, if I'm using an invisible thread or like a 60 weight thread, I'll use like a size 14 needle. But if I'm using something thicker, like a 30 weight or a 12 weight, then I'll use like an 18 or a 21 needle. So I personally have found that my needle choice, when it comes to honest fabric panels, it doesn't really matter. But I'm also not like a needle perfectionist either. Like I typically only change my needle if I have a problem. Like I'm not like, oh, I better switch out my needle. It's like, oh my gosh, I keep having this issue. Now I better switch out my needle. So I'm kind of a lazy quilter in that way.
I have a Christmas panel that like the background's all navy. And as my needle's punching it, it's rolling the thread so that there's a white streak in it.
What kind of fabric is it printed on?
It's printed on a cotton. It was by, I'm pretty sure it's Free Spirit.
So that could be more the contributor to that issue because so all of honest fabric panels are printed on polyester. And the reason for that is with digital printing, polyester has a more optimal composition within the fibers to accept the dye to make it more like one. Like you may have noticed this if you're using like spoon flower, for instance, they'll print on cotton quite a bit, but the cotton is more like there's the fabric and then the ink is sitting on top, right? So like if these are your strands and the ink is there, then sometimes when you're quilting, that strand can twist. And that's when you get the white streak because the ink is just sitting on top of the cotton. But with polyester, through the dye sublimation process, not only does it print on the fabric, but then it's heat sourced into the fabric. And so it's kind of chemically bound a little bit differently. So it's more resistant to fade. It's more color fast because the composition of the fabric having a synthetic component to it really helps the digital printing process to become one. So sometimes it's really not about the needle. It's about the substrate of the fabric. And not every cotton is created equally, just like not every polyester is created equally.
What's your favorite marking tool?
I kind of go in spurts depending on the fabric. So like if I'm using a dark fabric, I like to use like a white chalk pencil. But if I'm using a lighter fabric, then I'll typically use a blue erasable marker. And I kind of go through phases where it's like, what's cheap on Amazon or what can I get overnighted because I'm working on a project and I'm impatient. So I'm not very brand snobby with marking tools. I do like to try to use something that's like chalk based versus ink based because I'm paranoid, even though like the ink has always been fine and the chalk has always been fine. But I don't know if it's just something about like the chalk knowing that once it's washed away, it's gone forever, where I've heard like horror stories of like ink coming back. So for this quilt, for instance, I marked with chalk because it's a dark colored fabric. So that's the back of it. Do you want to see the front? The front's just a little bit prettier. I
I
put
love those
crystals all over
colors.
it.
I love
Yeah.
those colors.
Isn't that pretty?
Just lovely.
Yeah.
So do you have a favorite quilt?
Oh my gosh, that's hard. I feel like quilts are like food. Like, I don't know if I could pick a favorite food, but I can definitely tell you that I crave some things more than others. I would say this quilt, the Royal Huntress, that is definitely one of my favorites just because it was so challenging and it really expanded and sharpened my skills quite a bit. This quilt is really fun. It's also a custom printed quilt top from Honest Fabric. I love that one because now I get to have a Lone Star quilt that I didn't have to piece. So I love that one for that. This one I would say is definitely always going to be like in my top 3 because of how significant it is to me as a quilter. You know, when graffiti quilting was born, it's almost like this is like the newborn photo of graffiti quilting when you like just always cherish those photos, you know. And then this one, this musical one up here.
Oh, I didn't realize you were the one that made that. I love that
Yeah,
one.
thank you. Yeah, that was me.
Was that 2014 or 2018?
It was 2012, actually. So,
2012. Okay.
yeah, so this quilt, Shimmering Symphony, this kind of actually put me on the map as a professional or a competitive quilter before graffiti quilting did. So, I did this for a competition that was a special exhibit at Houston International Festival in 2012. It was sponsored by Swarovski Crystal, which is like, duh, of course, you have to like put all the bling on it that you can. And the theme was music. And so that was the quilt that I came up with. But yeah, that was pre graffiti quilting even, which is really cool. So I have another one here that I wanted to show you. I haven't actually really talked about this quilt much yet. So this quilt is called Coven Lovin'. And this one I actually did piece, which is also a big deal for me because I usually try to skip the piecing. This quilt I have been working on over the course of probably a couple of years. So this quilt is very, very super special to me because I've had some personal stuff in my life that I've gone through and things that I've worked through. So I don't think it's super weird to say that it's like a therapy quilt. I'm guessing that most of us probably have some quilts that are like, whoa, that was like healing, or that was therapeutic to the actual process of making that quilt. And I call it a coffin quilt too, because it's like one of those quilts. It's like when you die, ain't nobody getting that quilt. You're going to be buried with that quilt.
So if people are wanting to learn your technique and learn more about this, do you have a course that they can take?
I do. And now is like the best time to take the course because we're celebrating the 10-year anniversary of graffiti quilting by celebrating with a brand new book. You'll get a copy of this gorgeous book. And I am planning this coming fall, so September 2024. I'm teaching instead of an 8-week course, which is what I've done in years past, it's now a 12-week course where each class session is every other Saturday, and the class sessions range from 2 to 3.5 hours. And you'll also be able to have everything linked back into your book. So as long as you own a copy of the book, which you get when you take the class, you can access all of that course information long term. So whether you want to work through the class in the 12 weeks that I'm performing it live, or you want to register for the class and then do it over the course of a year, you can do it at your own pace and you have access to all of that course content. The other thing that's also really cool is that because so much of the content from the book is in digital form on my website, as I continue to grow, I can keep updating my website to those links. And as long as you have your tangible copy, you can access all of that information. Out of all of the art forms that you could do, out of all of the visual art, I personally obviously am biased, but I think if you choose quilting as that art form, you have good taste. But I think also sometimes it's frustrating as quilters where our taste is up here and we're like, I know what a good quilt looks like. I appreciate a good quilt because I've tried to make a quilt, or someone who is so special to me has given me a quilt. And so their taste for good things is up here, but maybe their skill is down here. And my job as the best free motion quilting teacher is to elevate your skill so that when you have taste for something and you say, I know what I want to execute, I know what I want it to look like or what it should look like, I need my skills to match that. My goal is to help you fill in that gap so that when you get to your quilting machine, you can execute because you have the skills and the muscle memory backing up the intrinsic innate taste that you already have as a quilter. I just want to help people fill in that gap.
You have an awful lot of energy. I'm sure. How old were you when you discovered you had an extra couple of gears than most people?
Oh my gosh, I never didn't know that, and I think my family was very quick to tell me that. Like my dad always called me the talk a lot chatterbox, so I knew that I had a mouth, and now I've just learned how to say the right things. So it took a lot of years of putting my foot in my mouth, but now it's like now that I have something to talk about that I'm so passionate about, that being coupled with the fact that I can just talk and talk and talk forever. I feel like I got really lucky to find that in my early 20s. And now that I've been teaching for 10 years and still just being in my early 30s, I'm not going anywhere and I still have lots to give and lots of excitement. And so I feel like what I lack in technique, I'll make up for in charisma.
So do you ever say no to projects?
Oh yeah, all the time. It's awesome to be able to do that. But I think a huge part of that is learning how to be financially sufficient in my business. So as much as I love talking about quilting, which actually that's still my favorite thing to talk about, I would say a close second is talking about like business and sharing like business insight, business advice. I think especially in the quilting community, a community that I hold very dearly and I'm very protective and loyal of. Don't be surprised if you follow me on Instagram and you see me like pop off once in a while in a very like attitude driven way when I see like an injustice in like business, because that's another thing that's really important to me. I want to make sure that not only can we make quilts, but that we can do it in a sustainable way so that we can continue to pass on such a beautiful tradition for years to come and to as many people as possible.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. If people want to reach out to you, how do they find you?
You can follow me on Instagram under Karlee Porter Design. You can register for my upcoming free motion quilting class, Grafitti Quilting, by going to karleeporter.com. No relation to the Fons and Porter.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Karlee Porter. I honestly wish I could bottle up her energy. She has accomplished so much in such a short period of time. If you are interested in her graffiti quilting course, her book, or purchasing one of the panels, I will leave links in the video notes below. I'll also leave links to her social media and email. Next time you're in your sewing room, be sure to have Karen's Quilt Circle playing in the background. I have interviewed so many interesting, amazing people on this show. Let one inspire you. And don't forget to check out last week's video too. Take care, and I'll see you next time.